I was inside the vault, and this knock on the door, and I open it up, and it's the watch officer. She hands me a loaded 45 and said, "I don't know what's going on, but somebody just kicked in the front door. They had 4 more locked doors to go through to get to us." She said, "As far as I'm concerned, we're under attack and our phone lines have been cut." And it's like, so she said, "Do what you do."
Welcome to The Recalibrated. I'm your host, Meet Kinker, and I'm here to take us through the journey of being in the service, transitioning out, and what today looks like. Our guest, Sean Wheeler, served over 20 years in the United States Navy from seaman recruit to lieutenant, traveled to over 30 countries, and provided crucial information to shape military action and cooperation around the world. Today, he is combating child trafficking through his non-profit, Starfish Ministries. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Absolutely wonderful to have you, good sir. So let's begin with the why. Why were you drawn to the Navy as opposed to, any other service?
Oh, I think I always had a sense of adventure. Um, and early on in my childhood, I got books about sailing and faraway places. And, that when in my high school days, when the recruiter showed up and they had that tall ship on there, and it's like, join the Navy, see the world. And I fell for the romance of it. Um, and, it certainly wasn't always that way, but it's funny because my wife now we visit. We just got back from Key West, and I just feel at home around harbors and ships, and in Hawaii, I tell her the ocean still calls to me. So
Okay. So no inclinations to be a bird rather than a boat. No Air Force, none of that.
no, my eyes, I don't have the vision for it, but I worked with
Fair
a
play.
lot of aviators, so
Sure.
um, and Marines and Army as well. So it's yeah, it was a good run.
I like it. So as far as, let's say humble beginnings, what was it like your journey starting out as an E1? What did the what, the where, the how? Tell us the whole thing.
Well, you mentioned briefly about my nonprofit work today.
Yeah,
Um, I grew up in an abusive situation, and so I
sure.
was on my own at 16. 18 rolled around. I figured, what do I do? And I really didn't want to go to college. And like I said, I was drawn to the Navy also in part because I was an exchange student overseas, and I thought, it was a time when it's like, yeah, we have to value our liberty and do something for it. And so, I was drawn to that. And then of course the adventure part. Um, when they say join the Navy, see the world, you really do. So, but it was a sense of patriotic spirit, and also looking, when you're on your own at 16 in high school, and I tell kids today, don't whine when all you have to do is homework, because I had to get an apartment, pay rent, get all the insurance, have a car, get the insurance, work a full time job, get my own food, and go to school and do my homework.
Now
and I,
you're leaving out climbing uphill both ways in the snow. You
yeah,
you need to keep that part in.
exactly. And, I mean, it's not really good for a 16-year-old to be on their own, but I really wanted to feel like I was part of something again.
Okay.
And honestly, it was odd when I got to boot camp. I tell people I actually enjoyed boot camp because it's like adults are yelling at me. I feel like a kid again. So,
I, I love that.
and I didn't even do anything again, feel like a kid again. So, yeah, I was quite happy. Um, and the Navy really was family in many ways.
Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, like you started off like how you mentioned boot camp. How was that? For you, was it always an adventure? Did you know what was coming next, or were you just kind of like, I'm along for the ride?
Yeah, I'm kind of was kind of along for the ride. I mean, it had its tough moments. I will say I do believe the Marines have hands down the toughest boot camp of all the services. We weren't exactly a cakewalk um, by any stretch of the imagination, but
Sure.
our company commanders introduced themselves, and the one guy said, "If you don't hate me now, you're going to in 9 weeks." It's like, oh, good, but I
Like
didn't to
that's
this
not a
day. I
threat,
don't.
that's a guarantee.
Yeah, it pretty much is, you know. But it was structure, and honestly, I think at 18 you think you're an adult, but you're still really technically very much an adolescent.
Sure.
And after being 2 years in a totally unstructured, everything on my own environment, I liked the structure. Um, and I got through just fine. I still have, they give you two report chits when you check into boot camp, and I still have both of mine.
I love
So I
it.
never got written up for anything.
It's almost like in a positive way, like the story, and it's a true story of like the man who said, "I just want to be arrested so I can have a place to sleep and play, things to eat and people to take care of me and be around." And it's like I get it, I totally like I just need something that makes sense.
Yeah. I really do believe that's important for teenagers in particular, and probably 20 somethings, to feel still like you're have more of a structured environment. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, the joke, not so much of a joke phrase of like make your bed, take care of yourself, brush your teeth, do the thing. And yeah, it's easy to kind of feel like I would say like an untethered balloon where you go, great, I have ability, I can float and fly, but attached to what? Who am I connected to? You know?
mhm. And it gives you a sense of community.
I get that. And a lot of men would say, this is a brotherhood, and I think that that is not a word to be thrown around lightly.
That's very true. It's and I know the Marines, the Army, the Air Force, everybody feels the same way about their
Sure.
own particular service. You feel very more connected there, but
Sure.
you still feel a connection with others. And
Definitely
so,
not.
I have a stepson now who was in the Marines. He likes to say that they were the men's department of the Navy, and I like to remind him that I outrank him.
You're like, good sir, not only can I take you around and show you what's what, I'm an O1, so how about no?
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually,
Goodness.
in the Navy, I retired as an O3.
Oh,
So,
03, pardon, I had that incorrect.
at, technically, what's called an O3E. So I was known as what was called a Mustang because I was prior
Gotcha.
enlisted. So,
Gotcha.
but it's like,
Only flexing on him a little bit.
oh yeah, yeah, and I remind him, just remember, old age and treachery will take out youth and strength anytime.
Well, see, this is one of those things that you can tell, like the phrase of like father strength, dad strength. Listen, you know that guy where you're like, oh, he's kind of got like a little bit of a belly, or this, that, and the other. That man will bury you. Don't play that game. That's not a wise decision.
No,
Oh
that's for
goodness.
sure. So yeah, so that's pretty much it, I
Gotcha.
think.
So how about this? You go through and you're, just starting out. You end, as you even said, an officer. How did you get to be a geopolitical analyst? Because that's not exactly what, usually young men set out to be when they first
Yeah.
get here.
Yeah, very true. I was, as an enlisted rank, a cryptologic technician,
Mhm.
working in the code world. I think honestly, one has to have more of an engineering mindset to do well in that. My commanding officer at the end of my first enlistment, the captain called me in and said, "You need to go to college and get commissioned, and I'm going to send you letters in school and checking up on you, make sure you're being good and all that. And he did, actually.
How
Um,
about that?
so I ended up leaving the Navy, and then I got a recommendation from him. I got uh, a recommendation from the because he knew people. The senior Republican in the House of Representatives at that time
Hmm.
sent the Navy Secretary a recommendation. So I was given what was called a direct commission
Okay.
because I had 6 years of active duty, almost
Sure.
7.5 actually, and reserve. And so, I became a commissioned officer at that time, still in cryptology. Discovered
Hmm.
I that's an even more advanced level of engineering mind think, and it's like I do not like this. I'm not a I'm not a numbers guy, but
I
I
get it.
had worked with enough people who were what were called geopolitical analysts, and decided I wanted to do that. So in the Navy, there's two designators. The career numbers that are assigned, and I moved over to what was called a 1630 intelligence officer.
Gotcha.
And part of what I studied in school was the Middle East and Arabic, and so I was plugged into a Middle Eastern geopolitical track at that point.
Gotcha. Okay, so that picture was kind of painted there.
And I
So,
love the work. It was fascinating.
what about like favorite? Like, obviously, we're not talking classified or otherwise, but like, what's like a really, really fun bit like that you just got the most joy out of?
Well, I tell people because I actually went back to teach at the Intel school, new
Hmm.
junior officers coming in, and told them I used to read like 5 newspapers a day, not everything, just the news sections.
Sure.
And it's interesting to see what you can learn in what they call open source material, and then something about what's going on behind it. It's like,
Sure.
so we read typically the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, LA Times, Jerusalem Post, and the Christian Science Monitor.
Gotcha.
Um, and yeah, it's kind of fun to put the puzzle together. Well, you do your best too when you're learning. Um, I was during the first Gulf War
Hmm.
doing the overnight briefing for the admiral, and nothing went on. So I thought, well, I'm doing my own spin on this today, and I get up and I do my presentation, and the admiral's looking at me like this, and he said, "Well, Sean, whose assessment is that?" I said, "Well, sir, it's mine. Am I wrong?" And he's like, and the captain behind him said, "Oh, for crying out loud, Don, leave the kid alone. It's as good as anything I've heard." And I thought, you know,
Break out the giant rubber stamp. Good
yeah.
enough. There we go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are times you learn by doing, just like anything else. And
Sure.
now, then after years, I became much more seasoned at it.
Sure.
And so, because you have more experience, exposure, and knowledge base. So, but
Sure.
yeah, that was one of my early things. It's like, well, I think
Gotcha.
this means that. And the
Fair
admiral's like,
enough.
I,
Like your
who,
your
who the,
guess is as good as any. Who knows?
yeah, who the hell came up with that? So,
Like, it was a slow Tuesday. Leave me be.
yes, quite
Goodness.
right.
So
Sure.
I'll ask a different, like adjacent question, a little different query. What is a story that you are ever so glad that smartphones were not around to record?
Oh gosh. Um, yeah, on at work or on leave. So,
I say this much: dealer's choice, good sir. You get to play it how you like.
well, I mean, sailors that leave in Key West, we just got back from visiting there, and the
Sure.
aviators, first time I went down there, they said, "Well, we're taking you to the Hog tonight." It's like, why is there a hog on Key West, and why do I care? They said, it's not a hog, it's the Hog, and it's the Hog's Breath Saloon, which you may be able to see as my sign back here.
I see it. I see it.
So, we went there, and who knows what all went on, but it's a classic aviators bar. It still has that vibe today,
Sure.
but yeah, you kind of let your hair down, what little you
Hmm.
have, and just really yeah, and you probably use words your mom would be like, "I did not teach my baby to speak that way,"
Well,
but,
you
you
are
know.
like kind of, wearing the you swear like a sailor. I mean, it's in the title, you
Yeah.
know?
And
So,
it's funny though that when I became an officer and a gentleman
mm.
per as my brother points out, it took an act of Congress to make me a gentleman. Um,
I
like,
love
at
it.
least I got there.
Well, one out of two ain't bad. Kind
Yeah,
of.
exactly, perfect. Now, for I can tell one of my favorite things that happened or most interesting things. I was stationed in
Sure.
Alaska on watch. It's the middle of the night, and because I work in the area that I worked in, I was inside the vault, and
Mm,
this knock on the door, and I open it up, and it's the watch officer. She
mm.
hands me a loaded 45 and said, "I don't know what's going on, but somebody just kicked in the front door. They had four more locked doors to go through to get to us." Um, and she said, "As
If
far as
someone
I'm
hands you a
concerned."
sidearm and says, it's time to go, that's not a funny haha moment.
No, it wasn't, but it worked out in a sort of an odd way. It's like she said, "As far as I'm concerned, we're under attack and our phone lines have been cut." And it's like, so she said, "Do what you do." And keep in mind, I'm a 19-year-old enlisted cryptologist, and what I was taught
Sure.
to do is send out what they call the flash messages,
Hmm.
which I did. We were in Alaska. I sent it to Elmendorf Air Force Base,
Wow.
Kamisid, Japan, and Pearl Harbor, Hawaii.
Wow.
Well, unbeknownst to us, Air Force One is sitting on the tarmac at
Really?
Elmendorf Air Force Base,
Oh,
ready to take
wow.
off, and they delayed it. They
Okay.
said, "Yeah, we don't know what's going on." And then, sure enough, about 40 minutes later, she knocked on the door and she said, "Well, it turned out the Marines were conducting an exercise in how to invade a space and didn't tell anybody about it." And I go pale because I'm getting these calls from like, senior officers. "What the hell is going
Yeah.
on up there, young man?" And it's like, "I have not gotten anything more. I will let you know as soon as I can." And and they said, "And we have Air Force One waiting to take off." Um, so I told her all that, and
Uh-huh.
she's like, "Okay." Within with within
The appropriate response of, is there more to this story?
I don't think it gets any worse than you put Air Force One on hold,
No.
but so maybe within half an hour, the commanding officer, the executive officer, my division chief are all in the vault with me, and I'm scared to death, thinking, "What the hell did I do?"
Uh-huh.
And the watch officer too, and she's like, "What did we do?" And the CO turned to the chief and said, "Damn, chief, when you teach your kids to turn to and carry out the plan of the day, by God, they do." Well, by that point, Air Force One had been alerted. Okay, it was a non-emergency. They took off. Everybody was fine. Apparently, the
Yeah.
president wasn't even aware and didn't care. Even the next day, apparently, I'm told he found the whole thing rather amusing.
Like with the
So the
brandy,
crew,
like that sounds hilarious. Like
I can picture some poor child, 19-year-old kid, but
shaking with the
and
1911, like, oh no, what am I doing? What am I
I'm gonna
doing?
put I'm not even done with adolescence, and they're gonna send me to Leavenworth. And yeah, so you see, it did
Wow.
turn out rather, and it turns out the Marines figured that out on their own. The Marine
Wow.
CO on the island got some trouble for that,
Yeah.
and as well he should have, because it's like
Oh
you don't
wow.
break into somebody else's command without informing the CO that you know. Um, so, but
Yeah,
they
I mean
were,
you can, but you also may kind of turn red on from the inside out. Like that's a
yeah,
quick way to find out, as the phrase goes.
oh yeah. But the watch
Wow.
officer and we were just fine. Um,
Okay.
so the president apparently wasn't annoyed at all. I mean, it
How about
delayed
that?
his flight maybe an hour. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean,
That's wild. See, that's one of those weird timing things where you go like, well, the clocks aligned and it was stupid, and you go like, well, what did they do? And they're like, well, they ran an op, and you go, was this the time or the place to run an op? And you go, no, not even
yeah.
remotely close.
I mean, the
Oh
funny
my
thing is,
goodness.
we had, because we worked with aviators, and so I had
Yeah.
to erase all of the boards that they had in there, and then shred a bunch of material. And
Wow.
I was taught, if you have a thermite grenade, you put it on top of the safe, pull the plug, and it melts down and destroys.
Mm-hmm.
And the CO's like, damn, it's a good thing we didn't give the boy any thermite grenades or any of these people, because he would have melted the safes. I would have, because that's
You're
what I
like,
was taught to
you're
do.
lucky you didn't give him shape charges. Like, you know what? Let's have some fun today. Like, why not?
Yeah, exactly. And so, and that gave her back the watch officer back her loaded 45. But
Oh
yeah,
my
I
goodness.
mean, you
Oh,
know, it's like,
oh,
come on, I
that's
don't even shave yet, and you people are doing this to me. It's
that is wild. Okay. So going from that, which thank you so much. That's brilliant. So like fast forwarding a bit, like fast forward just a touch, like near the end of your service, like what kind of drove your decision to retire?
well, I on eight in Alaska where I was stationed, I was enlisted, and then I got out, and then I went to London actually, and got out after London. Went out back to the United States, went to college in a reserve unit, and that's when I got commissioned.
Okay.
Um, and I got out of university and with a degree in journalism, and
Mm-hmm.
worked two jobs in TV, and decided this really is not for me. So I looked at the Navy, and I went back on active duty.
Mm.
This time as an ensign in '01, and you know, with the hope of I went on active duty as a reservist, hoping to be picked up for full time active duty, regular commission kind of thing.
Sure.
And at the end of 2.5 years, the Senate cut the number of approved intelligence officers in the Navy by 48%. And so there
Gotcha.
was nowhere for me to be promoted to. So I said, okay, I guess I'll get out and go to graduate school. And that's what I did.
Fair
Um,
enough.
but I stayed in the reserve the whole time, and so was able to travel to Thailand and Hawaii and
Sure.
places like that, and get my full 20 years,
Gotcha.
um, and retired as an '03
That makes sense.
lieutenant, as y'all might say.
Lieutenant, indeed. Yeah, no, it's always that thing where when you talk British Royal Navy and then you talk States Navy, it's like only small differences. Only small
Yeah.
differences.
Yes, we
Well,
learned quite a bit of our traditions from the British Royal Navy. I would never, ever to this day toast anyone at an evening meal or anywhere else with water.
gin, like gin's a
Well,
thing.
gin, coffee, juice, milk, anything but
Yeah,
water. And we
fair
got
play.
that from the British Navy, because the belief is if you toast somebody with water as a naval person,
Hmm.
a sailor will drown. So
Fair play. Well, the thing about it is, there's actually an old, like it's been made into like popular like cocktail culture and all of that in the past, like decade or so. But if you've ever heard of like a pink gin, you actually have the British Royal Navy to thank for that, because, as you know, being a sailor, ice is scarce on a boat. You don't have like fresh milk is a rarity, and ice is also a rarity, and what ends up happening is, ages ago, the daily rations would include Plymouth Navy strength gin, and it would also come with Angostura bitters. And you go, well, what am I supposed to do with this? It's not like we can go to London and have a party. So what they figured out, this like absolute amazing bit of alchemy, is if you put just enough of the Angostura in with the gin to pink it, it
mhm.
it's like turning lead into gold. Like you taste it and you go like, there's sugar in this, there's this and this, and you go like, there's nothing except these really complicated, very loud ingredients. So yeah, again, cheers to the British Royal Navy.
Yeah, quite right.
Absolutely that. So let's do it this way. You're out. You're done. You're a civilian. What was the moment, that kind of crystallizing moment, where you realized, okay, this is going to be a little bit different?
As I noted, I was trained as a Middle Eastern uh, Islamic and geopolitical officer, and
Hmm.
the Navy, in its infinite wisdom, first assigned me to NCIS in the Navy Yard, which I
Okay.
loved. Um, it does look exactly, well, very close to the office on the TV show. Looks very real. Um, and I enjoyed that. But then when I moved west to continue graduate school, they took me out of that unit and put me in one in Aurora, and their focus was on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay.
Um, and it's like, I know nothing about the Korean Peninsula. I'm a Middle Eastern expert, and I really
Well,
could
you
care
also don't
less.
exactly look Korean, just to say.
Well, yeah, most intel officers don't, but
Oh no, it
you
needed
know,
to be poked very hard. Of all the things you're going to look like, it's not Korean.
yeah, yeah, well, that's true. Um, and it's an interesting geopolitical situation. I was more
Yeah.
fascinated by Thailand and Burma,
Mm,
but so I found a unit where I was able to move over um, for like 2.5, 3 years that focused back on the Middle Eastern stuff.
sure.
And then for some reason, the other one fell short. And so it's like
Mm,
the Godfather movie line. It's like, just when I think I've gotten away,
yeah,
they
they
pull
pull
me
me
back.
back in. There we
And
go.
I ended up staying there my last few years. And
Sure.
it just was not, that's when I realized, okay, as soon as I hit my 20 or eligibility, I'm out,
Yeah.
because I don't like this
Yes.
work anymore.
Yeah. So let's do it this way. What all of a sudden, like day two, you're a civilian. What did not translate well? Like coming from it being 2 decades in the military to going to like, great, I'm a civilian. What what just didn't translate?
I think probably the sense of community. You have to figure
Mm,
out a new community to find and be part of.
gotcha.
But even the work relationships that I did, I became a landscape architect, worked for, you know, municipal and county and government as a land use planner, development planner.
Hmm.
And I worked with a lot of great people, but, you know, the sense of belonging and pride in being part of something just didn't exist there. For most
So
people, it was a job that they loved, maybe, but
sure,
just a job.
fair. And that's an extremely common thing. And questions of like, well, what helped you adjust? And like, I've said this before, and I'm sure you have the exact same thing of, well, it's sort of like a weird death in a way. You go like, well, guess what? None of that makes sense anymore, kind of. Like, what helped you, like, kind of get back into the world and find your crew, your groups, and all of that.
I think a lot of it came from the fact that I was on my own so young.
Mm,
I was very adaptable,
sure.
um, and because I managed to stay the 20 years, I managed to retain my military benefits, and so we'll go to the local Air Force base for a commissary run. We can take
Sure.
privileges like at the Halekoa and Oahu, which is a
Gotcha.
military resort. And so when I get back into those places, I feel very much more like I'm surrounded by long lost friends.
At
And
home,
even,
welcome, all of that.
yeah, yeah. And
Gotcha.
even in Key West, even though it's been several decades since I've been there and was stationed there, it's like this was home to me for a while.
I
And
understand.
it's like Virginia Beach in Hawaii or in London. I took my wife to visit London, and I said, this isn't just a visit to a city,
Yeah,
which is interesting. It was my home,
I understand.
and I'm very attached to that. And so
I love that.
that kept me grounded. But yeah, there's just the early experience of being on my own. It's like, well, what are you going to do? You got to get up or give up or get up. And so
Yeah.
I always chose to get up.
Fair play. So, how about this? Was there anything that you needed to, let's say, unlearn? Like, oh, can't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, not really so much.
Okay.
It just makes the reason I laugh is I was a
Sure.
military contractor in Afghanistan,
Uh-huh.
um, in 2011,
Sure.
and I came back from that compound, and my wife is like, "You have got to put correct that language because, you get to a point where every word is not one that she wanted to hear. And it's like, oops.
You come back and you go, pardon, dear, that was a little bit off the cuff. I apologize. Just
Exactly. Quite, you
okay,
know,
fair
although I
enough.
have to laugh because, being British, uh, you all always make everything sound so elegant. It's like, oh dear.
Well,
Well,
we can
F you and
also
the horse
play.
you rode in on.
Yeah, well, that's true though. But the thing about it is, we can also go like because like when people say like, "Oh, do a British accent," and you go, "Which one? We have 200." Like if you go
Yeah.
like yeah, if you go like East End London, like, "Oh well, sort you out." Like you can get a little bit on the rougher end of things
No,
depending on where
yes.
you go. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's very true.
horses for
Um,
courses.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's Cockney. That apples and pears.
Apples and pears get up those stairs. Like there's some deeper cuts. So like talking about having a drink. Like, would you fetch us a pig's ear? Pig's ear beer.
Oh, okay, okay,
See,
yeah,
and that's one of
yeah,
those ones where you're like, "Oh, fetch us a pig's ear, would you?" And you go, "Okay, now we're talking code."
yeah. And so that was really pretty much it. But when I got off, active duty into
Yeah.
reserve and being
Hmm.
just a single college student, hanging out with college friends, it was less of an issue how you spoke. So you sort of
Sure.
gradually realize when you're at home, remember, parents, aunts, and uncles are watching, and
You're not on an active construction site. Mind the tongue.
exactly. And so you fit in, but
Fair play. Fair play.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll just say to the guests in the house, if you are enjoying this conversation as much as we are enjoying having it, smash that subscribe button. Now, I'll say this. Now, all of that, blah blah blah, all of let's gloss over your life. What are you doing now?
Well, as you noted, it's another complete turn in direction in my life. I run a nonprofit. We're focused on,
Yeah, what is the mission there?
well, our mission is in the fight against child trafficking,
Okay.
specifically sex trafficking, but also, bringing up awareness of labor trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Often the two go hand in hand. And I
Sure.
do provide a voice for boys in the public arena. The reason I was on my own at 16 is because I became a very angry teenager because as a preteen I had been sex trafficked myself for nearly 5 years, and my family had no clue because of
Wow.
the way the network operated. There's a myth that all kids are stolen away and disappear. Yes, that certainly does happen more often
Sure.
than people might like to admit. But yeah, I was routinely handed over and then brought back after a few hours, and you know,
As if nothing had
um,
happened, kind of thing.
right, and you learn to
Wow.
hide stuff very well. And so now you know, my mom and dad divorced, and that's when we moved away from that town just before I turned age 10, and we moved
Wow.
to another state. But 10 to 11 I was sort of like, okay, I'm away from it, but other predators would still find me into my teens. um, and essentially at some point my mom decided to remarry, which she did, and then
Okay.
wanted to move to a different state. Well, I'm in the middle of high school. I'm about to go into my junior year. I
Yeah,
don't
that's
want,
not the time or place.
so it's just, so I ended up living with my sister for a year, and then I lived with my brother, but in terms of when I say living, I had my own key. I was responsible for my own life.
Sure.
And that's why I was on my own. And I really learned quickly. It's like, I do not like this. I want to feel like I'm part of something again. So that brings it back
Okay.
full circle to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the military thing. But yeah, what I do is I speak now to educate the public on what trafficking looks like. It's a very constantly moving target. I
Sure.
teach people that boys are, in fact, likely half the victims in the United States and globally as well.
Sure.
Um, I talk about how it can be, what things parents can do to keep their kids safe. I do I go to Congress and I lobby for legislation. I'm part of a survivor council group out of New York. Um, and my most recent thing is I work with a nonprofit out of the UK called the Justice Defenders,
Okay.
and they help people in Africa in 3 countries who've been falsely incarcerated get out of prison.
Okay.
They are faith based, like my organization is faith
Sure.
based. And a friend of mine, Bruce, who was in prison himself for many years, got out and connected with them. And he said, I have told them all about you, so you're going to get a call. Keep in mind, Bruce is like
Okay.
6'5",
Oh,
very
wow.
strong and
Mhm.
very black. And he's like, and I don't want any back talk or sass. It's like, I love Bruce. He's an amazing man, but he's a
Yeah.
gentle giant, really. But
Fair.
so I get a call from the director, and he said, we encounter a lot of people with your past who are in prison. And
Mm.
because they were abused as children, they simply don't know how to trust anyone. We can love on them. We're, a Christian faith based organization. We can teach
Sure.
them about all kinds of things. But if they're not willing to believe that they're worth being loved, um, they'll never receive our help. Would you come
Sure.
to Africa to be our voice?
Okay.
And I said yes. So in May of last year, I was or this year, I was in Kenya. We were supposed
Okay.
to go to Uganda last month and didn't. But upcoming trips are planned. But that's an amazing bit of work because I got to speak in 5 prisons in
Wow.
11 days in Kenya. Um, and I am an ordained pastor now. And so I was able to give a message and tell people, first of all, it was never your fault, and
Sure.
don't let the world define you, and give them all kinds of reasons to say, let down your guard just one more time and let Justice Defenders help you. And maybe they can get you set free. And in
Wow.
every single prison, I had people tell me, okay, I'll try.
Wow.
And,
This is
you
like
could,
the worst case of pound puppies. You go like, would you just let me touch you? Just let me touch you so we can talk. Like that's it.
yeah, very true. I mean,
Wow.
and you can see it pulls up emotions in me because I see, what happened to me in the past. I'm now able to help people with that, and that's one facet of my work now. Um, but yeah, I'm. There were times in my life when, honestly, I was very much like that. It's like, can somebody just, you know, hold me or love me? And
It's a
other
real
times
thing.
it's like, you don't want to be touched by anyone, but or you
Well, I don't
respond
even
with,
know if it's a want, but you feel like you just can't. Like it's that thing of like I think as long as someone have a heartbeat, they always have the want, but there can be just so much piled on top of it where you go, but I can't though, you know?
that's a great way to describe it because, and I'm not there anymore, but, if I was visiting someplace at
Sure.
a church or somewhere and a strange man, and sometimes a woman too, would hug me, my first thought would be, okay, when do I have to perform?
Jesus.
Because they put that into you.
Yeah.
Now I don't feel that way any longer. Then you get sort of process that and you realize, um, you get to a point where you say to yourself, no one touches me
I
unless
get it.
they want something. And
Hmm.
you get through that and you get through all these things. I had so many people in the prisons in Kenya ask to be hugged. And it's like, yeah,
How about that?
absolutely, I can. And,
How about you like, I'm not going anywhere. We'll hug for 13 minutes. We'll do this.
yeah, and what they told me was, because I tear up often when I speak, um, the Kenyans we worked with said
Hmm.
it's really important for African men to see that, because to set it up for you, we tell them this man's come from halfway around the world just to
Hmm.
talk to you, and he has a powerful story and horrible things happen, and be prepared because he delivers a message unlike you've ever seen. And I get up there at points, I've
Wow.
got tears, and they're like, "You're allowed to cry?" "Yes, you are."
Yes. I'm
And
going to
that
say one
breaks down a
thing.
wall.
I'm going to say one thing as an interjection. You've used a word that I don't really like. I'll say it this way. You said the word things happen to me. Now, I can say it like this. You've studied what we can call coincidences, and you look at patterns and you study all of that. But I can say it like this: the butterfly flaps its wings. Everything is connected one way or the other. And to say that something happened to you is like dismissive to me, where you can say, "Oh, well, the wind happened to blow across my face." I would say bad things were done to you, because that ascribes the responsibility. It's not something that, oh, it just happened. It just happened. It didn't just happen. This was done.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of times when I've spoken in the West, and this also wasn't true in Kenya, people say, "Well, you know," I'll talk to people ahead of time and say, "What we're really talking about here is child rape."
Yeah.
And they're
You
like,
can
"Don't
like
use
say the
that word.
words. Say the word,
Don't,"
because that's what it is. Call it.
and they don't want you to use that word. And so, I've learned to soften it up somewhat for American audiences.
Right.
Alexander McLean, who founded Justice Defender, said, "Don't
Mm-hmm.
soften it up here. Call it what
Like,
it is."
call it raw.
And I said, so I'd never been told that before. Now I'm getting to a point, and I love
Mm-hmm.
what you just said. It's not things happen to you. It's not
No.
like it's not a breeze in the wind.
This
People
was a
did bad
decision.
things.
It was, and you can quote me on this: bad people do bad things. That's a fact.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to say
And
this. I detest that this was done to you. I thank you for soldiering on.
thank you very much.
Absolutely
I
not.
found my purpose.
Oh, I love
Um,
that. Goodness.
and I get this is not what I picked, but it is
I don't
what I've,
think anyone would have picked that.
but I look along the way. Um, I tell people, look, it's a rare day when I don't relive those events in my
Sure.
mind. But from a theological perspective, it's like it's a terrible thing to lay down on yourself a life sentence when God holds the pardon in his hand. Let it
Well, I
go.
can say it this much. I can say it this much. When all that is noise. It's one of those things where the the kind of urchins from the past always want to steal the light from me from tomorrow. And
Yeah.
here's the big thing that they always forget. The big thing. Laughter, joy, all of that. And you go, you know what? I went bowling for the past 2.5 hours and I didn't think about you once, because you're just a shade. And that's the
Yeah.
thing. That's the thing to remember when you go like, no. And I think that's the thing that people forget, is it's easy to forget that you have the power, the ability to say
Mhm.
no.
Right.
And that's
And
everything.
it's I've had people say, just let it all go. Well, that's not exactly easy to do.
That's
We
dismissive.
can't. Exactly. And it's like we can't change the past, but what we can change is what we let it do to us.
Definitely
And
that.
so now, I remember I'm not there. I realize
There you
it,
go.
and I'm making a difference. One of the stories I told him in Kenya, um, was I said, they asked me, why Kenya, why Africa? And I said,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to see the lions. And they're like, well, don't get too close. They might be in the mood for American food, but you know, it's, it's like, and so I told him when I was about 6 or 7, and a lot of that was going on. My mom gave me a book about the animals in Kenya,
Sure.
and it was proof to me that all the stuff that happened didn't take away my innocence as a child, because I
There
remember
you go.
reading the story thinking, if I could just get to Kenya and hang out with those lions, they would keep me safe.
Oh, I love that.
And you don't think, no, they'd look at you as a nice little snack, but because as a little kid you think, yeah, I'll go hide behind the lion. Well, and I told him in Kenya, I said, the ironic thing is the very thing that I was trying to escape from the U.S. as a little kid and come to Kenya is now what draws me here in the
How about
end
that?
anyway.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll say it from Rudyard Kipling. Keep reading about the animals.
Yeah. I mean, it just, and then I heard a real lion's roar. I wrote an article for Justice Defenders, and
Okay.
when you hear a real lion the first time,
Yeah.
I have never heard a surround sound that imitates that. In fact, it scared the bejeebers out of me. We were at an outdoor restaurant, and I hear this roar, and the Kenyan staffer said, "Ah, you heard one of our lions." I said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, is he real?" He said, "Oh, he's very real." And I
Oh
said,
wow.
"Is he just over this wall?" He said, "Oh no, if he were there, we wouldn't be here. He's about
Yeah,
two
fair play.
miles away, 2 miles or however many meters that is away." It's like, whew. But you hear that, and then I found out an African lion's roar can be heard up to 5 miles distant on the
Hmm.
savannah,
There you go.
and you know, it's a very powerful thing. And so, but yeah, that it's just ironic. The thing I wanted to get away from to see the lions is,
Not what you call home.
yeah, it brought me there in the end to be. So
I
it's
love it.
it's a good thing.
There we
Yeah.
go. Okay. I mean, these, I can't thank you enough. These are amazing stories, and thank you, sir. But like with all of this, which is just kind of, if you wrote it down, no one would believe it. I'll say it that way. Like it's
Yeah.
just wild. What would you like want people to know about, like your story and veterans and like just today talking about all of the, oh well, I've been left alone, or I needed something, I needed to be together. What's the thing that like, if you could give like the thought to civilians and go like, this will help?
Oh, I'm not really sure. I think
And that's okay.
you know it, I do get asked sometimes. It's like, how come the veterans get all this health care and stuff, and everybody else doesn't? And it's like, well, first of all, 1.5 to maybe 2% of the entire population are veterans. So
Hmm.
98% of you live off the freedom that we went there to defend.
Hmm.
Um, so it's not like it's just handed to us. But
Sure.
unfortunately, in the area I live in, Colorado,
Hmm.
Larimer County is the second highest most veteran suicide area in
Oh
the
wow.
country, or at least is very highly rated. And veterans commit suicide for a lot of reasons. In fact, you know, the last time I was actually abused was at my very first duty station. And that's when I finally
Wow.
drew a line in the sand and said, no one ever is going to take advantage of me again.
Wow.
And they tried to, I think the intent was to get me booted out of the Navy on a medical discharge, and it didn't work. And I managed to stay 20 years.
Okay.
So, but veterans are, and service people are, I don't want to say necessarily unique. Well, we are unique. There's a lot of different types of unique. I mean, it was good for me, but
Okay.
we need to not turn our backs on them. We have too many homeless vets. I will say some of them choose that, and that's
Sure.
fine. But it's like, if you have resources that are available and don't
Sure.
want to use them, then that's your choice. But um, it just really, uh, everybody's got a story, and like I said, it's a rare day. I don't remember stuff, but in many ways, I've had a very good life, and I'm not unhappy with how it's been. And so I've
Okay.
had my odd adventures. I mean, who can say they put Air Force One on hold?
Okay. Let's
I
do
know one
this.
other person to do that, but yeah, I
Look,
mean,
you're
it's,
one of two. You're one of two.
yeah.
Okay. Let's go a little bit lighter. What is like a telly show or film or something that you just love? And it can be something that it's so stupid and that like it's bad and it's hilarious because it's bad. It can be because they nailed it and you've like, oh, they did this so well. It's like I can taste how accurate that is. Like, what's the thing that jumps out to you?
I think there are two. There's,
Okay.
I've always thought the TV show MASH really nailed it, because it captures the dramatic side of,
Sure.
and I've talked to Korean veterans who are like, yeah, they really sort of nailed, but it also captures the community side.
Sure.
And when I was a junior enlisted, and I was on in my off hours in a house party or something, the lieutenant would say, "Just call me Phil." You know, you let your guard. Now in the workspace, you wouldn't call them by their first
Yeah.
name,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was the MASH really showed both the challenges, but also the community relationship.
Sure.
One that cracks me up
Hmm.
is Kelsey Grammer was in a submarine movie called Up Periscope.
Down Periscope.
Down Periscope.
It's one of my absolute favorites. Oh my goodness.
They're saying, "You really want that guy? He has a tattoo on his member that says welcome aboard." And I thought, it's crude, but
You're like, I would drink with this man. Like,
I wish, yes.
I can quote that film verbatim. It's like, tell them about the Murmansk brushing incident, and you go like, yeah, no, that's Stepanek.
Yeah. And there are pieces of junk that the military has that they've held on to forever, and yet
The
people manage
USS
to make it work.
Rust-Oleum.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, those would be
goodness.
two.
Oh,
There
I
have been some
love
good
that.
good war movies out, and it's not that war is good, but it's the telling of the story, I think.
Sure.
Another one I love, which is sort of in between, is called The Final Countdown, where an aircraft carrier goes back in time to,
Little different of a tale.
yeah.
Little
And
different of
so,
a tale. Oh my goodness. Well, Sean, I can say thank you so much for coming. And finally, for everyone that have been just journeying along with this story, how can they find you? How can they connect with you?
well, and you're free to share on any post. My website is www.starfishcolorado.org. And the name of our organization is Starfish Ministries Colorado. And it has my email, phone, contact information. And so that's a great way to connect, and they can see the interviews I've done. My book is on there if they're interested in some of that too. I mean, it's all starfishcolorado.org is a good place to connect.
I love it.
And I do respond to my email.
Well, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been absolutely brilliant, and thank you again. And we'll have plenty more in the next episode. Jizzle.
Big SAS, and so, but yeah, that was I learned to, especially when the guy picked me up by the back of my pants.